Hello there, everybody. My name is Ashley Hunt. I'm the Senior Project Management Instructor here at StormWind Studios, and I thought I'd talk about managing projects post-COVID. We will get there. We are getting there. The world has been super weird. A lot of us have been working from home, and it's become sort of the norm to manage projects in a virtual environment, which is great because originally in the original PMBOK guides, PMI was kind of like, it doesn't work very well. Well, guess what? It does. But what happens when we go back? So I wanted to go through just some advice. I mean, I'm sure a lot of this you'll be looking at it and going, well, yeah, of course. But I figured I'd call it out just a little bit in the context of project management. Very first thing, obviously, we're all focused on critical success factors. But there is a little bit of give and take here with the world the way that it is. And so instead of having all of these things that we're super hyper focused on, let's just take a look at the critical success factors and see what can we really drill into and how can we get this absolutely where we need it to be, back on schedule. Schedules are critical success factors. Finances, what are we spending? How are we spending it? What does our procurement look like? And then issues. So one of the ways that we have been really kind of talking about in our PMP and our ACP classes is about tailoring. The world now needs to be adaptable. And that's where you start to see a lot more agile best practices or hybrid types of projects because people are like, wow, we've got to pivot, we've got to dodge, we've got to parry, we've got to change things and try and tailor how we're doing things to really get through these hoops, get through these speed bumps, and get to that point where we can most effectively manage our projects. And a lot of that has to do with technical project management skills. And we'll talk about one of those in the form of risk management and a risk register. But technical project management skills are the ability to understand a variety of different knowledge areas and processes. Things like scope, schedule, cost, risk, resources, procurement, quality, stakeholder engagement, communications. All of those things are going to be able to help you tailor. And that's why the PMP class is so interesting because it's like a mini MBA. It gives you the ability to look at all the facets of both virtual, co-located, agile, predictive, hybrid projects to implement some of those technical skills. And we really drill down into real world, what can you actually use in your real world? Other things like looking at your organization and being knowledgeable. What is your organization's strategy right now? What are their goals? What are their objectives? What products, what services have been impacted? And what are different and better ways that we can help operations maybe get ahead of the competition, be creative, and apply what the benefits are and the ROI to the business is to the projects that we're working on to make sure that all those key performance indicators, the ROI that the organization is looking for, are being considered in our projects. And so scope and risk and cost and schedule and quality and all of these things that we build out plans for and then attempt to execute effectively. But on the other side of that, we have leadership. And as a project manager, maybe your team is virtual. Maybe you love it being virtual. Maybe they love it. Maybe your meetings are starting on time because you're using Zoom or Teams and things are much more streamlined as far as communication. But in some cases, I'm hearing that people are like, well, we don't have as much communication because we're virtual. So managing relationships, looking for areas where conflict could occur. Being the strength for your team, being optimistic and positive and try and see the forest through the trees and be a visionary while also at the same time active listening. Right now, it's really important to be able to listen to what's going on your team, with your customers, with your organization, being respectful, obviously cultural sensitivity. Relationships are as important as the actual execution of technical project management skills. And man, are we dealing with a lot of change, right? We're all going through major changes. How we adapt, how we adjust to what's going on in our world during or post, hopefully soon, COVID. So managing changes in the project and the organization implies the ability to be malleable and to pivot and adjust. And a lot of organizations had to focus on having a robust theory and a better approach to change management. Think about how quickly did your organization go from co-located to virtual? I know I get a lot of IT professionals in my classes, and some said, wow, it was just a massive fire drill. And other people were like, well, it went pretty smoothly. Or we already had this setup where we had flex schedules where it was co-located and virtual certain days of the week. But now trying to get back from virtual into the organization is also a big change for a lot of us. So embracing change as a strategy, trying to mitigate, avoid risks, and be able to ultimately know how to process change and be part of the change and help your organization. One of the things that I really love doing are retrospectives. If you're not familiar with Agile frameworks, retrospectives are like lessons learned meetings. They happen at the end of each iteration. Most iterations are about 2 weeks to 1 month max, but more 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, the development team gets together and has a meeting where they discuss, what should we keep doing? What should we stop doing? What should we start doing to look at continuous improvement? These bi-weekly, bi-monthly, whatever you want to do as far as your iterations are concerned, these meetings allow for a focus on change, continuous improvement. How can we do a better job in the next iteration? I also think retrospectives are absolutely applicable to predictive, traditional types of projects. A check-in, a weekly meeting to really say, okay, this is what we're doing really well. These are some of the things that went a little bit sideways, and these are some of the things that we want to focus on to implement in the next several weeks or in the next month, rather than a lessons learned meeting at the end of a project and saying, well, that went sideways. We'll try not to do that again. So no matter what types of projects you're running, a retrospective is an excellent way to make sure that you and your team are checking in and focusing on continuous improvement. Because no matter what, risk is going to happen, right? So what a risk management plan, and you can pull from this what'll work for your organization, work for your team. Having a strategy for risk, how does that work? Methodology, a little vague, but you guys can probably drill down to the point where if this happens, we do this. What are the roles and responsibilities of the team as far as risk is concerned? When do we need to escalate it up? Funding, like contingency reserves, which for me is usually 10% above the actual baseline or the cost budget for the project, and those together get managed as the entire project baseline for cost. Timing, if you have some information on that. But really on the right side of this is where my focus usually is when we're planning out for risk. What are the major categories of risk that we're dealing with? Technical risk, cybersecurity risks, external risks, internal risks. What are the big scope risks, cost risks, all these categories that can help us plan. The other thing is knowing what your stakeholder risk appetite is. What is their tolerance for risk? Some people are risk takers and they're like, yeah, let's do it. Some people are risk averse and they're like, no, let's not do that. And some people are more risk neutral, as in, well, if you can convince me, I'll go that direction. So it's really important to understand how your stakeholders are responding to threats and opportunities so that you're better able to manage risks and keep your stakeholders engaged. The other thing that's super important is the definition of probability and impact. I know some of you maybe use high, medium, low, red, yellow, green, a Likert scale of 1 through 5, whatever that is, or you're like, we just put out the fires with fire hoses. We don't really do risk management. And that's okay. There's never a bad time to begin. But having those definitions where you say, if it's plus or minus, 2 weeks on the schedule, that looks like a risk for our schedule. We might want to take some corrective action or try and avoid this or prevent something from happening. Oh, there's an opportunity if we document it as this. What's a 5? What's a red? What's a yellow? Because depending on your stakeholder appetite and their tolerance levels for risk, if you're a risk taker, you might be like, that's a yellow. If you're risk averse, you're like, no, that's a high, that's a red. And getting everybody on the same page with risk is one of the most important things that you can do. Because that way, everybody identifies risk, everybody manages risk, and then we can start to look at the identification, the root causes, and what the probability and impacts are, the categories and the interactions that the risk owners, the people that implement the responses, are going to have to take based on that. And then we have a living, breathing risk register. So the management plan is the strategy, right? It's the how-to. Then we have that risk register, which is, and this is just an example, but we have different categories of risk. Is it a scope risk, cybersecurity risk, technical risk? What's the description? Who's the risk owner? Who's the best person to implement the response? The people who do the work know the risks, right? And if you, whatever scale you use, I use a 1 through 5, and then multiply the probability times the impact to get a score. And then I use the stoplight, the red, yellow, and green. What is the priority of the risks? What are the indicators? We call these triggers. I'm triggered, but a lot of times they're hindsight, as in, that's why that happened. So I always document them no matter what. If you can see it coming, here's the trigger. If you experience it and you look back and go, we'll still document that for lessons learned. Then whatever our strategies happen to be. Are we going to mitigate? Are we going to change our project management plan and avoid a threat? Are we going to transfer it via procurement? How are we going to deal with that? Risk management is iterative. And like I said, either people do it or they don't do it, but there's never a bad time to start risk management, to identify those risks on a regular basis, to get to the root cause, to look at the qualitative aspects of what's the probability? What's the impact? What's the category? And then to quantify, maybe this is a schedule risk or a cost risk. What do we need to throw at that as far as time and money in order to manage that? What are the odds that that's going to happen? And then planning out your responses. So those are just some of the things that we could start to do right now as we move into this post-COVID world, no matter what. Having technical knowledge, being able to pivot and adapt, be able to look back in a retrospective kind of way and say, what are we going to change? What are we going to do differently? And then to really plot out a strategy for risk management and then keep that running tabulation of your risk register. Those are just some of the things that we can start to do today to help our teams, help our projects, and help our organizations. And hopefully that helped you.